All right, we have some pretty interesting things going on in the world of wildfire in California. Just a refresher on this season. We picked up a lot of rainfall this last winter, well above average. Much of central and southern California picked up two to, in some cases, even three times as much rain as we normally see. So, because of that, our fuels had a lot of moisture in them as we got into wildfire season. And then we even picked up some random rainstorms through spring and then even into summer. And then now getting into fall, it looks like today is the first day of fall, and there is a pretty decent rainstorm right on the horizon. So that's a big part of the reason that this wildfire season, again, it's not officially over, so knock on wood as I say this, but it's been pretty good so far. We had one big fire that was in the desert area, and then we've had a large number of fires up in northwestern California. But that's where there's some good news on the horizon with this rainstorm that's set to move in on Monday. So, other good news, the California drought, at this point last year, I believe like 96% of the state was in severe drought. Because of all that rainfall we picked up, 0% drought as of right now. And then the last little bit of drought remaining in California, 0.24% of the state is in any kind of drought category. It's the moderate drought category. That's in the exact same place as where we've seen some of our wildfires over the last month. And that's exactly where we're going to be picking up the largest amount of rainfall. Now, the last little part of this story is the wildfires burning up in the northwestern part of the state this last week led to some very poor, even unhealthy, and sometimes even hazardous air quality in the Bay Area and the Central Coast. It's always worse overnight and in the early morning hours where we'd have calm winds and all that smoke would just settle down into the surface, whereas it would blow into the Bay Area and Central Coast overnight. But that's also where there's some good news because we've had some winds blowing that smoke out of here over the last 2 days, and then with the rain coming in, that'll hopefully just put out the fires, and then there will be a lot less smoke in the future. So again, with this system coming in, it's the first real rainstorm of the year. It's a real cold front. It looks like it's going to mostly bring rain up to the northwestern portions of California. They could see 1 to 3 inches directly over our fires. Now, one important thing to remember there is that when you have wildfires, it burns out your vegetation, and it's usually your vegetation that's holding the hillsides in place. It's almost like the root systems are a structure for your soil. So when your plants burn out, the hillsides can become a lot more susceptible to things like mudslides or debris flows. And these fires are burning in some areas that have some very steep terrain. So that will be something I watch over the next few days. But overall, I'd say this system is going to be great news for wildfire, drought, and air quality in California. Just have to keep an eye on any mudslides that might happen out there. Now, one interesting thing I want to kind of close up that section of this talk with is just the overall view of wildfire in California. The 5-year average at this point in time, we would have burned about 1 million acres. So far this year, we've burned about 250,000. And if we can continue this little rainy pattern that it looks like we're going to get into, then it could end up being a pretty great year for us. Now, with that being said, with all the rain we picked up this last winter, we do have a lot more fuels that have grown. So even though maybe there was enough moisture in them to not be a danger this year, doesn't mean that the wildfire problem in California is completely over, because it is California, guaranteed at some point in the future, even though on Monday we might officially be at 0% drought in California. It usually takes a few days for the water to really soak in, but even though the drought might completely be done next week, it's California, so we know we'll be in drought at some point again in the future. So all of those fuels that we're able to grow with all this rainfall that we've had, eventually those are going to dry out. So now is maybe as important of time as ever to do things like fuel reduction and prescribe burning to clear out some of that vegetation that grew while things are still moist, while the danger's not that high, and before things really start to dry out again in the future. So thought all that was just a good kind of update for wildfire season in California. Now that it's the official start to fall, just kind of wanted to wrap up what we saw this last summer. and what's maybe going to change over the next couple of days. But then I was also reading a little bit in Fire in California's Ecosystems today, and I just read the section about snow. It's page 14 in chapter 2 that talks about the California fire climate. And it brought up a couple interesting points about how snow impacts wildfire. So I talked a lot about all the rainfall that we picked up this last winter, but that's not the only precipitation that we get in California. If rain was the only precipitation we had, then right when the rain stopped, then our fuels would just start drying out. And it'd be maybe late winter, early spring, and then they'd be drying all the way until we get the first real rain again, which sometimes isn't until late October or early November. So one thing that helps us in California is that we also get snow. And the snow is, you can think of it as a reservoir of water. It's often the largest reservoir that we have in California. And the sun angle isn't really high enough to melt that snow until maybe April or May. And in years where we pick up a large amount of snow like this last year, it can stick around all the way through July. I remember actually doing one weather forecast this year where it was 4th of July and we were showing video of people skiing and snowboarding at Mammoth still. So you can think about how that helps you out in terms of wildfire. You have all this snow built up, and instead of your fuels drying out maybe in March or early April when the rain stops, the snow slowly melts maybe all the way into July, and that continues to add some moisture back into your soils, and then that moisture finds its way into your plants. And if you ever tried to start a campfire with a moist log or a dry log, you know it's much harder to start a fire with a moist log, and it's also not going to burn as hot or as intensely. So it's that snow that slowly melts into the late spring, maybe even early summer months, that helps keep a bit more moisture in our fuels. Now, one interesting thing that I just learned about the snow that we get in California that I never really thought about before, it's that when we have an above average rainfall year, usually our snow levels are higher up. So it's maybe a little bit confusing right there. But if you think about atmospheric rivers, so about 30 to 50% of California's annual rainfall will come from just maybe 5 big atmospheric river events. So it's big storm, usually comes from the south and just funnels in a bunch of moisture from, in some cases, the tropics. That's usually where California gets a lot of its rainfall. I think we had 12 atmospheric rivers this last year, which is why we picked up so much rainfall. But the key point there is that in the years where we pick up the most rainfall, so above average, a lot of that rain would be coming from the south, so it brings in warm air with it. There was actually a couple days this last year that almost felt tropical, where it brought warm air in at the same time that we had some rainfall. So what that does is in the years where you have a lot of atmospheric river events, you have above average precipitation, but it's also bringing in warm air. So your snow is going to be falling at a higher elevation. And the exact fact that I read in this book is if you have 70% of your average precipitation, so it's a dry year, your snow levels, where your 50% snow levels in Southern California will be around 2,000 feet. But in a year where you pick up 140% of your average precipitation, so it's a really good rain year, a lot of atmospheric rivers, a lot of warm air coming in, then your snow levels in Southern California will be up at 2,400 feet. Or actually, both of those are in meters. So correction on that. 2,000 meters goes up to 2,400 meters. Glad I just corrected that before I had to redo the entire video for accuracy. So why does this matter? The reason I would say this is good news is because it means that in the below average rainfall years, so 70%, your snow levels are going to be farther down. So I haven't looked into this too much, but I'd imagine that helps us out with wildfire because we would have more of a snowpack, or not more of a snowpack, there'd probably be less snow overall, but a larger percentage of our mountain would be covered in snow, which is that reserve which slowly trickles moisture into the fuels as you get into the spring, April, May, June, July. So less rainfall, but lower snow levels means most likely larger percentage of the Sierra would be covered in snow, so then more of that vegetation would have that trickling effect of water. Something I thought was interesting that I'm going to look into more. And I'm going to continue these videos every single day, so if you want to learn more about wildfire, I'm slowly making my way through this book. You can come along on this journey with me, and thanks for watching.